This is the Algebra 1 review for mid-Unit 6 test. If you understand the concepts on this study guide, you should be just fine for the mid-Unit 6 test tomorrow. Number 1. Quadratic patterns require the step number be squared. That's the key when you're looking at the pattern they give you. Try to find a square of the step number, and then how much are you adding or taking away from that square? So once you've been able to identify the square, next identify how much you are adding or subtracting to or from the square. The expression will consist of these two parts. So you'll have the step number that will be squared, and then you'll either add or subtract some amount. Number 2, projectile motion. This could be something being thrown, something hit, a rocket blasting off, a cannonball being shot, a bullet being shot, anything that has an up and down and forward motion. Projectile motion expressions consist of 3 parts. You have gravity, you have the initial velocity, and you have the initial height. When you are looking at the expression, the t squared part represents gravity. The t part represents velocity. And the coefficient or number only part represents height. So when you are given projectile motion expressions, you need to be able to interpret the different parts of it. You need to understand what part of it is representing gravity pulling the object down toward the earth. Which part of it is representing the initial velocity that it is hit with, or thrown with, or launched with. And you need to understand which part is telling you the initial height from which it was launched, or thrown, or hit. Number 3, equivalent equations can be achieved by either multiplying factors together or by dividing out similar factors. To multiply polynomials together, we use the FOIL method. F stands for first terms. O stands for outside terms. I stands for inside terms. And L stands for last terms. To divide out factors, look for common numbers or variables. Does everything have an x that you could divide out? Is every number divisible by 2? Could you pull a 2 out of it? Things like this. So what they're going to do is they are going to give you a polynomial. It might be in factored form, it might be in standard form, and then they're going to ask you to identify all the similar or the equivalent equations. And you're going to have to understand whether the equations are equivalent by either multiplying the factors together and seeing if you get the same answer, or maybe pulling the same numbers or variables out and actually factoring it. So you're going to have to understand how to compare and move around and manipulate to see whether these equations or expressions are equivalent to each other. Number 4. Perimeter of a rectangle equals the side lengths added together. The area of a rectangle equals the side lengths multiplied together. So they're going to give you a situation in which you are trying to build a 3-sided fence against a building, and you're going to need to be able to fill out a table with the width or the length and the area. So you've got to understand that if they give you a total amount of fence, how do you have the widths and the lengths so that they add together to equal the total fencing? How would you build the length and width so that they have a certain area? You need to understand how to write the equation in terms of finding the length or finding the width, or how to write the equation for the area. So you need to make sure you understand how all of these terms relate to each other and what their expressions or equations would look like. So blank functions always outgrow blank functions as x increases. Remember that exponential equations always outgrow quadratic functions. And blank functions have x as the exponent, while blank functions have 2 as the exponent. Well, if you're looking at these two, the exponential function has the x. That's why it can outgrow the quadratic. The quadratic has 2 as the exponent, and it can only ever be a 2. But the exponential function, as x increases, that exponent gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually that exponential function always outgrows the quadratic function. To use Desmos.com calculator, You want to type in the expression and it will show you the graph. And on your test, it will tell you to use graphing technology to graph an equation they give you, and then they want you to sketch it in the test. And they want you to label the points. So you need to understand that when labeling points, the x coordinate goes first and the y coordinate goes second. So the x coordinate is the number left to right, and the y coordinate is the number up and down. You also need to understand that the vertex is the maximum or minimum point of the parabola where it changes direction. They are going to ask you to graph the equation after you use the graphing technology, and they're going to ask you to plot the points of the vertex and the intercepts. So you need to know how to plot points, you need to know how to label points, and you need to understand the difference between the vertex and the intercepts. You also need to know that x-intercepts have a y value of 0 because as you change the x value on the x-axis, the y value is always 0. And you need to understand that the opposite is true. Y-intercepts have an x value of 0 because as you go up and down the y-axis, your x value is always 0. And finally, you need to remember domain and range. You need to understand that the domain refers to your x value and that your range refers to your y values. There will be questions on the test that ask you about the domains. You need to understand that what they're talking about are what numbers can work as the x values in that situation. If you have any question about any of the concepts on this study guide, please use class time to ask for clarification. The test will be tomorrow on the Kidam website, and you need to do as well as you can because the quarter ends Friday, and your overall test score average counts for half your grade.